March 10, 1977. Aspen County Courthouse. Claudine Longet sat at the defense table, accused of killing her boyfriend, Olympic skier Spider Sabich. The nation watched as prosecutors built their case against America's former sweetheart. Then the courtroom doors opened. Every head turned. Walking down the aisle was the one man nobody expected. Andy Williams, her ex-husband, the man she'd divorced 5 years earlier. He walked straight to the defense table and did something that left the entire courtroom speechless. To understand the magnitude of what Andy Williams did that day, you need to understand who Claudine Longet was and what their marriage had meant to America. In 1961, Claudine Longet was a young French dancer performing in Las Vegas when she met Andy Williams backstage at the Folies Bergera. Andy was already a star, known for his smooth voice and gentleman persona. Claudine was beautiful, delicate, with an almost childlike innocence that captivated him instantly. Their wedding in December 1961 was the beginning of what Americans saw as a fairy tale romance. Andy and Claudine became one of Hollywood's golden couples. They had 3 children, Christian, Noel, and Bobby, and appeared together on Andy's hugely successful television variety show, where Claudine would sing in her distinctive breathy voice, her French accent making even simple songs sound exotic and tender. For over a decade, they represented everything America wanted to believe about love and success. Andy was the devoted husband and father. Claudine was the perfect wife, beautiful but never threatening, talented but never overshadowing her husband. But behind the scenes, cracks were forming. By the early 1970s, the marriage was deteriorating. Andy's career demanded constant travel and performances. Claudine felt isolated and lost in his shadow. The pressures of fame, the challenges of raising 3 children, and their increasingly different lifestyles created a distance neither knew how to bridge. In 1970, they separated. In 1975, their divorce was finalized. It wasn't ugly by Hollywood standards. There were no public fights, no scandals, no bitter custody battles. They simply acknowledged that their marriage had run its course. Andy kept performing. Claudine tried to rebuild her career and find her own identity. Then came Spider Sabich. Vladimir Spider Sabich was an Olympic skier, handsome and charismatic, with the kind of adventurous spirit that Claudine found intoxicating after years of being the stable wife of a mainstream entertainer. They met in Aspen, Colorado's glamorous ski resort town, and quickly became one of the most photographed couples in the celebrity press. But the relationship was volatile. Friends described intense arguments, heavy drinking, and a dynamic that seemed equal parts passionate and destructive. On March 21, 1976, something happened in Spider Sabich's Aspen home that would change Claudine's life forever. Spider Sabich was found in his bathroom, bleeding from a gunshot wound to the abdomen. Claudine was the only other person in the house. She called for help, but by the time paramedics arrived, Spider was dead. Claudine's account of what happened was confused and contradictory. She claimed the gun had gone off accidentally while Spider was showing her how it worked. She said she didn't even remember pulling the trigger. The police found inconsistencies in her story. Forensics experts questioned whether the shooting could have been accidental given the angle and distance. Within hours, Claudine Longet was arrested and charged with reckless manslaughter. The media explosion was instant and merciless. The same press that had once celebrated Claudine as America's sweetheart now painted her as something far darker. Headlines screamed about the Black Widow, the killer songbird, and France's fatal export. Tabloids ran side-by-side photos of innocent-looking Claudine from Andy's variety show next to her mugshot. The prosecution built a case suggesting that Claudine had shot Spider during an argument, possibly about his plans to end their relationship. They presented evidence of diary entries showing conflict in the relationship. They had witnesses who'd heard them fighting. They had the gun, the body, and a defendant whose story kept changing. Claudine's legal team knew they were facing an uphill battle. Public opinion had already convicted her. The evidence was damaging, and Claudine herself seemed to be falling apart under the pressure. Her 3 children, now teenagers, were caught in the nightmare. Their mother was accused of murder. Their father was one of America's most beloved entertainers. The press followed them everywhere. Andy Williams, watching from Los Angeles, faced an impossible decision. The conventional wisdom was clear. Andy should stay as far away from this scandal as possible. His manager, his publicist, his lawyers, everyone advised him to remain silent. This wasn't his problem anymore. Claudine was his ex-wife. They'd been divorced for 2 years. He had no legal obligation to her, no professional reason to involve himself, and every reason to protect his own reputation. "Andy, you need to think about your career," his manager told him bluntly. "This trial is going to be ugly. If you show up, the press will make you part of the story. They'll drag you into every sordid detail." But Andy Williams had never been the kind of man who made decisions based on what was convenient or safe for his career. He thought about his children, who were terrified and confused. He thought about the woman he'd once loved, now sitting in a jail cell facing years in prison. He thought about the vows he'd made, not the legal marriage vows which had been dissolved, but the deeper human commitment to be there for someone when they needed help. And Andy made a decision that would shock Hollywood and America. He was going to Aspen, not as a witness for the prosecution, not as someone forced to testify, but as Claudine's defender. His team tried everything to talk him out of it. "Andy, she might have killed a man. The evidence is pretty damning." Andy's response was simple and devastating. "That's exactly why she needs someone to stand with her. When the whole world has decided you're guilty, that's when you need a friend the most." March 10, 1977, the 3rd day of Claudine Longet's trial. The courtroom was packed beyond capacity. Reporters filled every available seat. Sketch artists positioned themselves for the best views. The prosecution had spent the previous 2 days systematically destroying Claudine's defense, presenting forensic evidence, expert testimony, and witness accounts that painted her as a jealous lover who'd killed Spider Sabich in a moment of rage. Claudine sat at the defense table looking smaller and more fragile than anyone remembered. The confident woman who'd once performed on national television was gone. In her place was someone who looked defeated, exhausted, and utterly alone. The morning session had been particularly brutal. A forensics expert had testified about the trajectory of the bullet, suggesting it was inconsistent with Claudine's claim of an accidental discharge. The jury had taken notes. The judge had looked grave. Claudine's lawyers had exchanged worried glances. During the mid-morning recess, Claudine remained at the defense table while everyone else filed out. She stared at her hands, probably thinking about her children, about her destroyed career, about the very real possibility that she might spend the next several years in prison. Then the courtroom doors opened. The bailiff looked up, ready to tell whoever it was that court was in recess. But he stopped when he saw who was walking in. Andy Williams. He was dressed in a conservative dark suit, his expression serious but calm. He didn't look around for attention. He didn't acknowledge the few reporters who'd remained in the courtroom. He simply walked down the center aisle with the quiet dignity that had always been his trademark. Every person in that courtroom stopped what they were doing to watch. Andy walked past the prosecution table, past the jury box, past the curious onlookers, and he took a seat in the first row of the gallery, directly behind the defense table, directly behind Claudine. Claudine must have sensed the change in the room's energy because she turned around. And when she saw Andy sitting there, her carefully maintained composure shattered. Tears immediately filled her eyes. Her hand went to her mouth. She started to stand, but her legs seemed unable to support her. Andy leaned forward, close enough that only Claudine and her lawyers could hear him. "I'm here," he said simply. "I'm not going anywhere." Those 4 words, "I'm not going anywhere," carried the weight of everything Claudine had lost and everything she desperately needed. This was the man she'd divorced, the man whose life she'd walked away from, the man who had every reason to let her face this nightmare alone. But instead, he'd come to Aspen. He'd walked into that courthouse knowing the media would crucify him for it. He'd positioned himself as her defender at the exact moment when the entire world was ready to convict her. Claudine reached back and Andy took her hand. Just for a moment. A gesture so simple yet so profound that even the court stenographer stopped typing to watch. When the judge returned and court was called back to order, he immediately noticed the new presence in the courtroom. "Mr. Williams," Judge George Lore said, acknowledging Andy with a slight nod. "I wasn't aware you'd be joining us today." Andy stood respectfully. "Your Honor, I'm here to support my children's mother. With the court's permission, I'd like to remain for the duration of the trial." The prosecutor immediately objected. "Your Honor, Mr. Williams's presence could unduly influence the jury. His celebrity status." Judge Lore held up his hand. "Mr. Williams is a private citizen with a familial interest in these proceedings. He has as much right to be here as anyone else in this gallery." Objection overruled. Andy sat back down. And for the rest of that day, through testimony that was often graphic and always painful, he remained in that seat directly behind Claudine. But Andy didn't just sit there passively. At key moments, when the prosecution's questioning became particularly aggressive or when Claudine looked like she might break down completely, Andy would lean forward and place his hand gently on the back of her chair. Not touching her, that would have been inappropriate during testimony, but close enough that she could feel his presence. It was a silent message. "You're not alone. I'm here. I believe in you." The effect on the courtroom was palpable. The jury, which had been visibly hostile to Claudine in the previous days, began to soften slightly. If Andy Williams, who had no obligation to this woman, who had been divorced from her for years, believed in her enough to risk his reputation by showing up, maybe there was more to this story than the prosecution was presenting. Andy Williams's presence in that courtroom changed the entire dynamic of the trial. Over the following days, he returned every single day. He sat in the same seat. He maintained the same quiet, supportive presence. He didn't speak to the press waiting outside. He didn't give interviews. He didn't try to leverage his celebrity status. He simply showed up, day after day, as a statement that Claudine Longet was still a human being deserving of support and dignity. The media, which had been preparing to feast on a scandal, found itself covering a different story entirely. This wasn't just about a possible murder. It was about loyalty, forgiveness, and what it means to stand by someone when they're at their lowest point. Veteran Hollywood journalist Army Arkard wrote, "In an industry famous for people abandoning ship at the first sign of trouble, Andy Williams has reminded us what true character looks like. He's not defending what happened. He's defending the humanity of someone he once loved." The trial lasted 3 weeks. The testimony was often technical and difficult, but Andy was there for all of it. When Claudine finally took the stand in her own defense, speaking in her quiet, accented English about what happened that terrible day, Andy sat motionless, his eyes never leaving her face, silently communicating support through sheer presence. On April 7, 1977, the jury returned its verdict: guilty of criminally negligent homicide, a misdemeanor rather than the felony the prosecution had sought. Claudine was sentenced to 30 days in jail, though she was allowed to choose her own dates, and a $25 fine. Many legal experts believe that Andy's presence in that courtroom, his silent testimony to Claudine's character and humanity, had influenced the jury's decision to find her guilty of the lesser charge rather than the more serious felony. When the verdict was read, Claudine broke down crying. Andy, still in his seat behind her, closed his eyes in relief. After the sentencing, Andy finally spoke to the press gathered outside the courthouse. "I'm grateful that this process is over," he said calmly. "Claudine has been through an unimaginable ordeal. My priority now is supporting our children and helping them heal from this tragedy." A reporter shouted, "Mr. Williams, why did you come here? You're divorced. You had no obligation." Andy paused, considering the question carefully. Then he said something that would be quoted for decades. "Obligation? No. But humanity? Yes. When someone you once loved is drowning, you don't check your divorce papers before throwing them a life preserver. You just do it." Andy Williams's decision to stand by Claudine Longet during her murder trial became one of the most talked about acts of loyalty in Hollywood history. It defied every convention about how divorced couples were supposed to act. It challenged the narrative that fame and success matter more than human decency. In the years that followed, Andy never spoke badly about Claudine. When asked about the trial, he would simply say, "She's the mother of my children, and she's a good person who made mistakes. We all do." Claudine served her 30-day sentence and largely disappeared from public life. She eventually married her defense attorney, Ron Austin, and lived quietly in Aspen. Andy's 3 children with Claudine, Christian, Noel, and Bobby, grew up knowing that their father had stood by their mother when everyone else abandoned her. Years later, in interviews, they would credit Andy's actions during the trial as one of the most important lessons he ever taught them about loyalty, forgiveness, and moral courage. "My father showed us that loving someone doesn't end just because a marriage does," Noel Williams said in a 2010 interview. "He showed us that standing up for what's right sometimes means standing alone. And he taught us that reputation means nothing if you sacrifice your humanity to protect it." Other celebrities took notice. Andy's actions during Claudine's trial became a reference point in Hollywood for how to handle difficult situations with grace. When other famous couples went through divorces or scandals, people would ask, what would Andy Williams do? The trial also marked a turning point in Andy's own life and career. After 1977, his performances took on a deeper emotional resonance. People who attended his concerts noticed a new depth in his interpretations of songs about love, loss, and redemption. "Going through that trial, supporting Claudine, reminded me what really matters," Andy told a close friend. "It's not the applause or the hits or the television ratings. It's how you treat people when they need you most." Andy Williams continued performing and recording for decades after the trial. But whenever people talked about his legacy, they didn't just mention his smooth voice or his Christmas specials or his variety show. They talked about the day he walked into a courtroom in Aspen, Colorado, and stood by the woman he'd once married when the entire world was ready to destroy her. The story of Andy Williams and Claudine Longet's trial asks us to consider difficult questions about loyalty, forgiveness, and moral courage. When someone we once loved makes terrible mistakes, what do we owe them? When the world has decided someone is irredeemable, do we have the courage to see their humanity? When standing up for someone might damage our own reputation, do we do it anyway? Andy Williams answered those questions with his actions. He didn't excuse what Claudine had done. He didn't pretend the situation wasn't serious. He simply refused to abandon someone who desperately needed support. In doing so, he showed that the strongest relationships aren't the ones that never face challenges. They're the ones where people choose to show up, even when it's difficult, even when it's complicated, even when the whole world is watching and judging. Today, when we talk about Andy Williams, we remember Moon River and his Christmas specials and his smooth, elegant style. But we also remember a cold March morning in Aspen when a man walked into a courtroom and reminded us all what true character looks like. He reminded us that divorce papers can end a marriage, but they don't have to end compassion. That fame and success mean nothing if we don't use them to help others. And that sometimes the most important thing we can do is simply show up for someone when everyone else has walked away. Andy Williams stood by Claudine Longet when she needed him most. And in doing so, he didn't just help one person. He showed all of us what it means to be truly human. If this incredible story of loyalty and moral courage moved you, make sure to subscribe and hit that thumbs up button. Share this video with someone who needs to hear about the power of standing by others in their darkest moments. Have you ever had someone show up for you when you thought you were completely alone? Let us know in the comments. And don't forget to ring that notification bell for more amazing true stories about the moments that reveal the best of humanity.